Hey, hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. This webinar is on the topic of the impact of direct pay, how a Washington church installed resilient solar plus storage. This webinar is being presented by Clean Energy Group. We have an exciting panel of speakers with us today. Before I pass it over to them, I'd like to go over some very quick webinar logistics. We are using Zoom webinars if you haven't noticed. It's slightly new to us, but familiar with more people than our previous platform, I think. So thanks in advance for your patience if we're still working out any of the kinks on that. But some quick notes, all of the attendees today are in listen-only mode. Your webcam and microphone are disabled. The chat function is disabled, but we want to hear from you. So we ask that you please submit your questions and your comments using the Q&A panel. And we will save 10 minutes or so at the end of our presentations to address some questions and comments from the audience. It's one of the most valuable parts of our webinar. Please engage. We'd love to hear from you. You can turn on captions. Oops, I'm sorry. You can turn on captions through, sorry. You can turn on captions through GoToWebinar. Those are automated. So I don't vouch for their, sorry, people. This is the Zoom thing I was talking about. Okay, can't vouch for the captions, but you can do it. Final note before I'm done with this is that the webinar is being recorded and we'll post a recording of the webinar within 48 hours. We'll send it to you via email and we'll also put it up on our website at cleanegroup.org/webinars. So I will now pass it over to my colleague, Anna Adamson, Anna Adamson, I'm sorry, Anna, my colleague at Clean E Group, and she will introduce our topic and our speakers today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sam. And thank you again for everyone joining today's webinar. As Sam said, this webinar is a presentation of the nonprofit Clean Energy Group. We are a nationwide organization that works to advance affordable, reliable, clean energy for all. A few of our project areas include climate resilience and community health, distributed energy access and equity, energy storage and flexible demand, and how we can replace fossil fuels with renewable energy resources. Next slide, please. I would encourage everyone to go to our website, cleanegroup.org, to learn more about all of those project areas, as well as going within our project tabs to see the Resilient Power Project. CEG established RPP, the Resilient Power Project, over a decade ago to support communities that are advancing solar and battery storage projects to build local resilience. As a part of this program, we host the Technical Assistance Fund. Next slide, please. Where within the TIF, the Technical Assistance Fund, we provide Solar+Storage pre-development support to community-serving organizations, such as multifamily affordable housing providers, community centers, food banks, health clinics, the list goes on. Projects in all 50 states, DC, and Puerto Rico are eligible to apply for this support, and through this program, you would receive what we call a techno-economic feasibility assessment for how solar and battery storage could be implemented at your facility. It's essentially a toolkit so that you all can learn more about how much it would cost, what kind of economic benefits there are, what kind of environmental and resilience benefits you would receive through a system, get all of that information up front to hopefully be able to pursue and develop a project similar to what the Vashon United Methodist Church was able to pursue. So as we proceed through this webinar, if you are working with a community facility that could be interested in Solar+Storage and want to learn more, you can reach out to us and go to our Technical Assistance Fund page to take the first step towards project development. Next slide, please. We have a couple pictures of Technical Assistance Fund awardees who've installed projects in the past on this page. And then on the next slide, we just have a couple stats. Over the last 10 years of the Technical Assistance Fund, we've been able to grant over $2 million to our community partners. And we've supported, I think, about 380 facilities, if I remember right. On the next slide, it should include the stats for the project. So just a little bit of an overview of the impacts of the TIF over the years. Next slide, please. And then lastly, I want to mention our other project support grant program, the Resilient Power Leadership Initiative, which provides funds for folks to build capacity among community-based organizations. I won't go into detail there, but if this is something that interests you, you can go to our website, again, cleanegroup.org, and navigate to the Resilient Power Leadership Initiative page. Next slide, please, where I will introduce our awesome group of panelists today. As Sam said, my name is Anna, and I'll be moderating today's discussion and hopping back in for the Q&A at the end of the webinar. We also have Eric Walker, who is Council Chair at the Vashon United Methodist Church, and Kate Peterson, who is the Energy Resilience Specialist at the Washington State Department of Commerce. We have just shared a short handout in the chat box where y'all can go and read their full bios to learn more about who these folks are, what they do at work, and their experiences, accomplishments, all of that jazz. So I'd encourage folks to go download that handout so that you can read more about both of our speakers today. And so without further ado, I will invite Eric to start sharing his screen so that we can get this presentation underway. Awesome. Thanks so much, Eric. I can see it.
Good morning, everybody. I assume you can see my slides okay?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to make smaller the thing on the side. Okay, this is the story of how one church took initiative that led to broader collaboration with others. So let me get that. You may be wondering where in the world is Vashon United Methodist Church? Well, we're in the upper left-hand corner of the United States in the state of Washington, in the middle of Puget Sound, that little blue dot. And that little blue dot is an island that is shaped like the picture on the left, and in that island is a small town called Vashon. There's only about 11,000 people on our island. We have no bridges, and so we go back and forth by ferry, and we're a small church, as you can see by those statistics. So there's a couple contextual things that are important related to this presentation because it's about Washington State project. So Washington State has two special contexts. One is it has its own state-controlled money through what's called the Climate Commitment Act. It's not related to the Inflation Reduction Act or any federal money. It's generated from within. So it's really cool to live in a state where we can access grant funding for these kinds of projects. There's only a couple other states that have this, so we're very grateful for that in our state. So we won one of these grants. And the second context is that Washington State has lots of hydropower. So the impact of putting up solar on your building in terms of its having an effect on reducing the carbon footprint depends on who your utility provider is. Because as you can see from this somewhat complicated image, in the upper left-hand corner where it says investor-owned utilities, there are two investor-owned utilities that only access about half their energy from hydropower, and the rest is coal and natural gas. So Vashon Island is in one of these zones of investor-owned utility that uses fossil fuels still. So we're able to make the case to a grantor that giving us the money helps reduce carbon footprint. Some of our colleague churches in Washington State can't make that as strong an argument because they're heavily using hydropower. Just an interesting contextual factor. Okay, why did we pursue reducing our carbon footprint? Well, the United Methodist Church has a creation justice movement that is a faith-based Methodist effort to reduce churches' carbon footprint, not only for the churches themselves, but for the communities they work in. So there's a really important justice component. And then our conference, which is mostly Washington State, made up of 180 churches, voted to reduce our energy efficiency of church buildings and parsonages by 50% by 2030, a very aggressive goal. So we decided to go after it, and we decided to write this grant proposal to Washington State Commerce that had two objectives. One, to make our church building a centrally located service provider to vulnerable populations that typically wouldn't have access to power and service during periods of outages, resilience. And the second was to reduce our carbon footprint. So here's what our project looks like from an aerial view. You see in the upper right-hand corner our parsonage, where the clergy live. The middle is the education building, and on the lower left is the sanctuary building. You can see where the solar panels are going, a conduit trench, and then a battery wall on the side of the church. Here's some shots of it now that it's completed and in place. The panels on our education building. You can see the parsonage off in the distance, and then a picture of our 4 power walls for the sanctuary part of the project and 2 power walls over in the parsonage. Now, there's an opportunity here for a comment about the brand of our power walls, that they're the best product available for iSize project, and they're working very, very well. How do we pay for it? Okay, so first we had to do some work on our own. We had to put on a new roof for the education building, clean a roof, build a shed, and have interest set aside for our bridge loan. So that was from our capital fund. We won a $140,000 grant from the Washington State Solar+Storage for Resilient Communities program. And we knew we needed to fill in the gap, and we went for the IRS elective pay for almost $60,000. A quick note here is that notice the difference between our solar and storage costs. Adding storage to your project really increases the cost, but gives you the resilience that you need. In order to manage the cash flow of this project, the grant and elective pay are both cost reimbursement. So we needed funds up front to cover all of the expenses until those receipts were in our bank account. We did not have the cash flow reserves, so we were able to get a loan from a faith-based lender in the Pacific Northwest called Faith Foundation, who was very interested in supporting green projects. So after almost 1 year, how are we doing? So in terms of the resilience effort, we're working on building out a more formal resilience hub. We have the battery, the solar and battery now, so when the grid goes down, people can come to our building and at least charge their devices, and the service providers who are in our building can still work. But we're trying to think bigger, and this is an important definition that comes out of a publication from one of your partners, USDN, which is a resilience hub is a trusted community-serving facility that supports communities in everyday life and before, during, and after an emergency. So we're learning that Resilience Hub isn't just when the power goes down that you can provide power for your facility, but it's also providing services on a day-to-day basis. So we're in the process of working with our Resilience Hub collaborators. So in the bottom, you see Vashon Youth and Family Services. They provide a lot of vulnerable population services. The food bank on the left-hand side is on our campus, and we help host a trusted partner network of these partners talking to each other about how do we provide social services on the island. Real big importance is Vashon Be Prepared, which is about emergency preparedness. It's another nonprofit in our small community that's focusing on that. So impact so far is we're becoming a catalyst for this conversation taking place because the project's installed, and when the grid goes down, that immediate power resiliency will be happening. How are we doing on reducing our carbon footprint? Well, I assume everybody knows how net metering works, but just a quick little sidebar here. Number one, sunlight hits the solar panels and generates DC current. Number two, an inverter converts the DC to AC. Number three, that AC electricity is supplied to the building. Number four, excess electricity flows onto the grid. So if your solar panels generate more electricity than you need, it goes out to the grid to help other customers. But if it's nighttime and you're not generating electricity and not using your batteries, it comes off the grid. So net metering is the flow back and forth between excess power moments and demand moments. So this is one of my favorite pieces of paper I see every month, which is my electric bill for our church. And you'll notice that in the upper right-hand corner, the green bars represent our average per day usage. And as soon as the system went live in June, the green went away. There's a tiny little green spot in March. And that's because our net metering bank is reset to zero. And so we didn't quite have enough excess power at that moment. So we ended up paying for a little bit, but we hadn't run for a full year. When we run for a full year, we will definitely have excess power. And I'll explain what we're going to use that for later. We only pay $10 a month for the basic charge, and we have a net metering banking information section that keeps track of how much do we have in the bank. So after April, we had put 1,084 kWh in our bank. So this is what net metering looks like when you're generating plenty of power for your facility. In terms of our carbon footprint, before we installed solar, we were generating more than 18 tons of greenhouse gas. And once we installed solar, we dropped that to a little bit more than 12. But now we're in the process of converting our gas-fired furnace to electric heat pumps, and that's going to have a huge benefit on our carbon footprint. So just by going solar, we hit 28% reduction. Remember that original goal of reducing 50% by 2030? So once we get the heat pump project going, we'll drop our greenhouse gas emissions for these two sources anyway by 78%, which we feel pretty good about. Cost goes right down with carbon footprint, so we'll be reducing our costs somewhat by solar and a big step once we get the heat pumps installed. So let's talk about elective pay. In the webinar announcement, it's called direct pay, but the IRS official name is elective pay eligible tax credits. How do we get the $60,000? So many of you know, you've studied this, there's 4 basic steps. You install your system. Step 2, you pre-register with the IRS. Step 3, you fill out tax forms. And step 4, you receive the payment. Looks pretty simple, but there's a lot of details. So step 1, put qualified system in service. So it has to be in service in order to complete your application. The first thing you need to know is what's your tax credit number. And on this form that's published by the IRS, you'll see that investments for renewable energy projects is credit number 48. My tip here is be sure and figure out and remember your tax credit category because you'll need it later as you're filling out forms. The second is to pre-register with the IRS. Now there's this terrific manual for this pre-registration. As noted here, the IRA and CHIPS pre-filing registration tool. The thing to do is to read this carefully and follow every single step. It's really well written. It acknowledges nonprofits. It's just a super book. It's just long and complicated. So read it carefully and follow it, but also find out if your church has ever filed with the IRS. Churches are typically exempt from filing a nonprofit informational return that's called the Form 990. But some churches have a certain kind of income, unrelated business income, that requires them to file a form that would have established their tax accounting year. Typically, your tax accounting year is your budget year. But you want to know if the 990, if the IRS already thinks they know what your year is. And if you haven't ever filed with the IRS, you could just say what your actual year is. In that application guide, there's one section that asks for supporting documents. And there's 3 supporting documents: proof of ownership, construction permit, and permits to operate from the utility that prove to the IRS that you've got a system, you own it, and it's working. So the one piece I stumbled over was proof of ownership. How can I give them something that proves my church owns this property? Well, I use the official property value notice that the county assessor ships out twice a year to show that Vashon Methodist Church owned this property. It has the address, it has the value, more importantly, it has the church name. This was fine. IRS said, okay, that's good, we accept that as a proof of ownership. The permits are more straightforward. Be sure and hold on to your permits, scan them as a PDF, or if you already have the e-copy, have those handy so you can upload those into the registration. Then you file the forms once you're registered, and it all turns off of a form called 990T, T for tax. Form 990 is a big form that nonprofits have to file every year. 990T is a supplemental form that's only for specific purposes. I mentioned unrelated business income tax before, but also it's used for these tax credits. It's a one-time filing. It doesn't mean you have to keep filing it every year. That's a common question churches ask. oh my gosh, I'm going to have to file the 990 every year. No, you just have to do the 990T once as part of your tax credit filing. So you start with a 990T, but it needs the Form 3800 to be completed, and the 3800 needs Form 3468. And that's where your tax credit category is plugged in. So don't freak out, but hire a qualified tax accountant or advisor and make sure their filing software allows these forms to be e-filed. They can't just attach PDFs to these forms. It'll be rejected by the IRS. So not every accounting firm or tax preparer wants to do these credits, so you have to find somebody that both wants to do them, knows how to do them, and has the right kind of software. Some organizations, like Lawyers for Good, you'll hear about later, has been compiling a list of tax preparers that do this. If you want one with experience that I know I've done too, let me know and I'm happy to share who they are. Finally, receive payment. Your forms for the 990T are due no later than 5 months after the end of your accounting year. So you have to wait for the end of your accounting year and then prepare your forms. Realize the payment will not come until the end of the process, so make sure you have cash flow to handle it or secure financing for that reason. So here's a recap of our journey to get elected pay. So we started the pre-registration process before we even had our placed in service date in April of 2024. So you can fill out the form up to that point and then save your work. So you can easily go back to it when you're placed in service and finish up. We put our system in service in May 2024. So we then were able to complete the pre-registration because we had that date and we submitted in June 2024. We were issued the elective pay registration number in August 2024. So they accepted our pre-registration packet and gave us the number that was needed in the tax return. We filed our e-forms in October of 2024. They were actually due December 2024. We put them in as soon as they were ready and we had the software that worked. And then the check was cut December 10th, 2024. So it's real. Here's a copy of my check. It actually can happen. So it's pretty amazing when that check finally shows up after this long process. So one final note is that you can apply for more than 30% credit based on the items that are on the left: domestic content, energy communities, and low-income community. I've heard of one group that's filed for low-income community in addition to base credit, but that's a topic for another seminar about how to find out about those. So that's the story of the project. Now let's hear more from Kate about the collaboration and how what she provides has led to us talking to other churches and other nonprofits about how they could pull this off, just like Vashon did. Kate?
Thank you so much. So I'm going to talk about the power of relationships and also cover a little bit about the grant program and the successes that came out of that that funded the project at the Vashon Island United Methodist Church. And then I'm going to cover some available services that we have in the state of Washington. And then Eric and I are going to talk a little bit more about this power of relationships and kind of how we got connected, because it was kind of not a direct path. So in the state of Washington, at the Washington State Department of Commerce, we strengthen communities. We do that by supporting over 240 different programs covering a variety of topics. I'm going to start by talking about the Solar+Storage for Resilient Communities Technical Assistance Program and Grant Program. This program, the larger idea, was funded by the state legislature in 2022. The focus of the program was to fund solar and battery storage systems on community buildings. And it was intended to enhance grid resiliency and provide backup power for critical needs during outages. Now, the grant program had a couple of different components. There were two different grant types. One was planning and pre-development work. So that's looking at doing feasibility studies, figuring out which buildings that needed to be done, things like that. Typically, the communities would get a planning and pre-development grant, and then they would go out and they would hire a consultant to do this work. And then the other grant type was construction grants, much like what Vashon got from in spring 2023. At this point, this program has awarded a total of $36.7 million in grants over the last 2 years. And that is 104 different projects. The majority of them are planning and pre-development projects. So if those projects were deemed feasible through that process, they could go out for future funding opportunities to build those systems. We have awarded projects that would amount to 3.7 megawatts of DC solar power. And then that also amounts to 17.6 megawatt hours of battery capacity. So just, across the state, this is a lot of community-centered solar energy and a lot of battery capacity to serve our communities. So that was one part of the program. The other part was we had a technical assistance program, and this was really the first of its kind. It was an in-house technical assistance program that provided direct assistance to communities. That program, over the period of the 2 years, served a total of 44 communities. That was serving 18 counties across the state, as well as 5 federally recognized tribes. We were actually able to provide no-cost feasibility studies to 45 of those. We provided 45 no-cost feasibility studies, not to all of those communities. There was a ranking process, but we were able to provide that at no cost. This amounted to about $70 million in viable projects. And actually, we were able to assist communities in applying for 19 different successful grant awards, which amounted to $12.2 million in funding, bringing into those communities for solar and storage specific projects. The majority of those were construction loans, but there were a handful of planning and pre-development grants within there as well. Now, this technical assistance program in this format is no longer available, but I'm going to walk into another one that we do have available. So let's look at what we have available now in the state of Washington around solar and storage, as well as direct pay assistance. So when the Solar+Storage for Resilient Communities Technical Assistance Program went away, it was actually absorbed into our larger Washington Energy Resilience Technical Assistance Program. This program provides all the same resources, minus the no-cost feasibility studies. However, we are working to get those refunded because the ability to cut down on the bureaucratic barriers for communities of having to go through contracting, having to go through grants, hire a consultant. We have found after we got the data from the solar and storage program that it was 300% cheaper for us to provide these services through the technical assistance program versus offering out planning and pre-development grants. So we're working on getting those re-added. But this program provides direct technical assistance to communities to explore and find the best energy resilient solution or solutions for their community. It is not specifically only solar and storage. We help communities with anything that's energy related. There's a lot of possible outcomes for this program. A lot of it, one of the main goals is to have a community-driven energy resilience plan. So that's helping communities identify sites. We help with community engagement. We fund bringing in live captioning, ASL interpretation, and language interpretation, because that's a barrier for people to participate. And it's a barrier for communities to pay for those services. And then we'll also do energy assessments for best fit. We help communities determine if they need to do a feasibility study. And then we're working on trying to find ways that we can help create lists of available vendors in our state so that communities can go to those lists knowing that they're going to find someone that does this work. We help identify funding sources for the communities within this program, and then we'll help them apply for grants. This program is available to Washington communities at no cost. The QR code will take you to an intake sheet. Now, if you are not located in Washington State, you are welcome to email me about, especially if you're a state government, how to do these types of programs. I've been in communication with multiple states on how we were able to pull this off because, like I said, this is kind of the first of its kind. The eligible communities for this technical assistance is pretty vast. It's basically anybody but an individual household. Things like HOAs are also really hard just because there's not a lot of funding available, but you can always email me. At this point, this program started in February of 2023, and we are serving a total of 76 communities across the state. That includes 10 federally and state recognized tribes, 16 local governments, 84% of the communities we serve are rural, and the majority of the communities are within or serving vulnerable populations. It consists of over 80 projects and $88 million in viable projects. Of that, we have actually supported communities in receiving approximately $30 million in grant funding over the period of the 2 years. The other program that we have available is the Federal Clean Energy Tax Assistance Program. This provides free assistance in filing direct pay for these clean energy tax credits. We have partnered with the Lawyers for Good Government, and they provide that assistance to Washington communities. Much like the Technical Assistance Program, it's available to many types of organizations located within Washington State. If you're unsure if you fit within one of these categories, you're welcome to reach out about eligibility, and they'll try and help you. And just, as assistance is in high demand, organizations or entities serving underrepresented, overburdened, or vulnerable populations and communities are going to be prioritized. The QR code will take you to their website for this program. So now I'm going to transition into a little bit more about Eric and I's story and kind of what we are intending to do in the future. So I'm going to pass this back to Eric for a minute to talk about how we got connected, because it was not direct.
So it was a random connection where once we had installed our project, word was out that, oh, you can go see one that isn't just an idea or a dream. And in fact, one of our county council members was interested in the topic of resilience. We set up a meeting. She came out with a lot of other people from the county and state government, and a colleague of Kate's attended from Washington Commerce, and I was talking to him. Meanwhile, we received a message from Anna looking for projects that were live and on the ground that someone could help with a webinar. Well, she blasted that out to me, Kate, and others. And I said, oh, I know of one. And then Kate said, well, what about this? And that connected us through that opportunity. Also, I was working on an EPA proposal for a cluster of churches in Washington State to try and win some funding for resilience, and needed some feasibility work done, and learned about Clean Energy Group and started talking to Anna, and I think that's how I ended up on her mail list. But the point here is just keep talking to people who are interested in clean energy and attending things like these webinars, and don't be afraid to reach back out to some folks to say, well, what about this or what about that? And you never know who they know or how it might connect into something beneficial for your work.
Yeah, the engagement specialist that went to the event with Eric actually emailed me at about 7 o'clock in the morning saying, hey, I'm going to this event. Do you know anything about this project? Because he had heard that I worked with the Solar+Storage for Resilient Communities Technical Assistance Program. However, Eric was not part of that program because they just went through the grant program. And so I had to dig around to find information about them. But it's always interesting how all of this stuff, you start interconnecting with everything. So one of the things that we realized, and we came, as Eric and I got talking more, was kind of that a lot of, and I noticed this even within the technical assistance program, was a lot of it is ad hoc planning and coordination. So when Eric had gotten his grant, he heard from another United Methodist Church about who was also interested in some of this resilience hub work. And he referred them to the Solar+Storage for Resilient Communities program. However, I'm assuming, and Eric can correct me, that he was thinking about the grant program because the technical assistance program didn't actually exist at that point. And so, however, because that time had passed, that community actually was able to enter into the technical assistance program, where they received the planning and pre-development work from me through the, kind of that capacity work. Then they, based on their community, and they were ranked high enough that they received a no-cost feasibility study. Their feasibility study was favorable. I actually went out to their church on a Sunday after service and had a conversation with anybody who was interested in learning more about the project. They submitted a grant and they were successful, and their system is getting installed now. But even beyond Eric actually making referrals, 2 additional United Methodist churches have actually independently found the technical assistance program. So one found it, and they were wanting to explore just a solar-only system. And it was primarily for economic savings because they wanted additional funds for the many community services that they provide, as well as some greenhouse gas reduction goals that they had. And we worked with them on getting a system figured out with a local solar provider. And then we actually applied to a number of grants, and many of them were unsuccessful, which is how it works sometimes. But ultimately, they have been successful. And the grant that they applied for, they will have to apply for direct pay. So now I've put them in contact with Eric so that he can help them feel confident that they know what they're doing. And then the other United Methodist Church that joined, they are the 2 members are their disaster leaders on their island. And so they were wanting this system for disaster resilience, kind of like what Eric was wanting for Vashon. And unfortunately, their building is much older and is on the historic record. So we got to figure out how to navigate that part. And the building just has a lot of structural needs in order to be viable for this system. But I continue to work with that community to see if there's another building that maybe isn't the church that could work, because ultimately, regardless of the church not being right, that community still needs this energy resilient solution for them. And within those 76 communities that I'm working with across the state, 7 of them are faith-based organizations. And that just, echoes the fact that faith-based organizations show up in disasters. They're thinking about this. A lot of them are community minded, and they want to serve their greater community when the world goes south. So Eric and I have been talking a lot now that we are connected. And what does the future look like for this work? And how do we move away from that ad hoc coordination? We're never going to get fully away from it, but we kind of view this time with the changes in the financial landscape and the political landscape within this country, and even within our state at Washington, that now is the time to plan and organize. Some of the funding streams that we've come to rely on in the past are either greatly diminished or they've gone away, but we are confident that the funding will come back at some point. There will be funding, and we want to be ready to jump when it's there. And so we are brainstorming, Eric and I, on how we can create a coordinated effort so that when that funding comes back, those communities that are interested and ready can jump. Because ultimately, we need resilience hubs in every community across the state. This is not just a Vashon Island problem. This is not a city of Seattle problem. This is a little tiny communities that get cut off when the power goes out. And some communities, I work with a lot of communities who they actually experience multi-day outages as their day-to-day life versus just disasters. So those communities are just trying to work on energy reliability issues. But so in Washington State, we always talk about the big one. It's our big earthquake. When the big one happens, those communities will actually be cut off for months. And so trying to work in a coordinated way to get resilience hubs in every community that needs one versus just who's ready to jump. So Eric.
So we're going to start working with Kate throughout our conference, our 180 United Methodist churches, and try and put out this call to action about getting ready. Now's the time to get ready. And Clean Energy Fund may be able to help out, and a Clean Energy Group with the Technical Assistance Fund, as well as Kate's resources. And where the next step is to figure out how could we make this a statewide effort. We have the organization structure. We just need to have a couple eco warriors like Kate and myself pushing this forward. So we're really looking forward to this next year or 2 or 3 of work in mobilizing not just the United Methodist churches, but the faith-based community.
Yep. Or nonprofits or local governments. But, it takes one big idea. Big ideas sometimes can create big change. And I'm constantly pushing communities to think big, because when we think big, we're able to chip away at things. But if you're very specific or very, very limited in your goals, it's going to be harder to find matches. And I have found with the communities that I've worked with, the ones that think big, we usually can find something that works. And I kind of always am constantly thinking about what could we've accomplished a lot with the amount of money that we had, the effort that we had, the resources we had, but what could we accomplish with a statewide coordinated effort? And that's really what we wanted to leave today with. Now, Eric has also found some great non-Washington specific resources, so I'm going to let him talk about those.
Yeah, we've mentioned already Lawyers for Good Government, direct pay legal assistance. They've got their fingers on the pulse of what's happening today with whether direct pay is going to keep existing. They publish regular memos about where it stands. And these things we've talked about today, so far so good. There's some other lesser things that are in danger. So that's a great place to go. Also, the North Carolina Clean Energy Technology Center has a database of state incentives for all states. So you go to that website and they've got a great map. You click on your state, and if there are grants or incentives or other programs, they're all listed out with a good search engine. So we highly recommend checking that out.
And most of all, thank you so much for having us. So this is our contact information. Thank you to the Clean Energy Group for actually ultimately facilitating this connection between Eric and I. And yeah, I'm glad that we got done a little early. So y'all, because I see lots of questions. So.
Yes, exactly. So many questions. Thank you both for so much for, presenting, showing your experiences building Solar+Storage at the Vashon Community Church, and then how this has been able to catalyze other projects. Again, here are the faces of all of us, which I think we can take off the screen in a minute. Again, if you want to learn more about each of them in the chat bar, there's the handout, and we will be sharing a recording of today's presentation within about 24 hours, as well as the slide deck that they went through, all of that sort of information you'll receive a copy of. But without further ado, let's hop into questions. Eric, you already covered it, actually. There's a couple questions in there about the future of direct pay, and I would just echo what Eric said. Lawyers for Good Government is a nonprofit organization, and they have their finger on the pulse of what's happening when it comes to elective pay / direct pay and other clean energy happenings at the federal level. So I would encourage folks to look there.
I would just add one little thing, if I might, Anna,
Mm-hmm.
is the worry is about IRS staffing for this effort. So if IRS staffing gets squeezed too hard, there won't be as many staff on this processing. So we don't know. The plan is just forge ahead, get your work done, get it in. and let's hope for the best.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that actually segues well into a question that folks had. And Eric, if you're able to share your slides, I think it's slide 29, where you talk about the timeline of when you all applied for pre-registration and then ultimately received the tax credit. There's a couple questions in there about timeline. So just as well, I get the first question actually is, Eric, could you confirm the fiscal calendar of the church if the fiscal year starts in January or July?
July.
Okay, super. So they did have to wait until the following fiscal year to complete the elective pay registration, official registration.
We lucked out because we were put in service just before the end of our
Yeah.
fiscal year.
Yeah. So it's a pretty great timeline. It's a lot quicker than some folks may be able to access, but it looks like from the time that they submitted pre-registration, it was only 2 months to get their registration number. And then someone asked how long from the time that they filed their tax forms, how long to actually receive the check. And it looks like, again, only 2 months.
Maybe 3.
Maybe
3.
3, yeah. So just around that timeline, yeah, 3-ish months. But you can see here on the map, so to speak, timeline. And I think that kind of gets back to what Eric's talking about with staffing at the federal government. These timelines are subject to change. This is what was happening last fall, but your project may experience a different timeline. But that's what had been going, and
We learned that they were batch processing things, so it was what was in the queue. So they were trying to get the previous fiscal period cleaned up and finished, even though we may have been in earlier than they could have processed this maybe sooner, but we're going to get last year done and then we'll go to the next year. But you're right, it may be the optimum scenario given what's ahead of us.
Yeah, yeah. Now, Eric, another question for you. They wanted to confirm what size solar and battery storage system you all pursued. And
Yeah,
if not,
30,000 K or let me just put that slide back up so I don't misspeak, okay? I'm the grant guy, right? I'm not so much the technical guy.
and while Eric's pulling that up, I'll answer another question. You cannot pre-register until your system has been placed in service. As Eric said in their presentation, they started the pre-registration process earlier on and then left that last question blank, which said, what date was your system placed in service? So they had to wait to actually submit it until it was placed in service.
Right.
Oh, perfect. Great, great.
So we got a 30 kW, 82 solar panels, and 81 kWh storage.
Great.
So
Thank you, Eric.
82 panels.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Now we have a couple questions about complementary technologies, and I'll start first from the Washington Commerce side of things, Washington State Department of Commerce side of things. Someone's interested in wastewater lift stations, compressed air backup. They were curious if that is at all eligible under any programs that you all have. And I think I can proactively say if you have specific questions about your project to reach out to, Kate or whoever's listed on their website as the main POC.
Yeah, and I think that the thing to keep in mind is, unfortunately, I'm limited to Washington State. I am not able to help entities outside of the state. However, you're welcome to email me and I can see if I can find something similar. If these systems are located in Washington State, I am actually working with a lot of wastewater treatment sites. There are actually some really good examples in the eastern US around partnerships with their utilities around resiliency. So there's one particular one in Jersey where the utility paid to put the system in, they get ownership of the battery and the solar in a non-disaster situation. But if there's a risk of disasters, say a big storm coming in or anything, they actually stop using the system so that the waste treatment plant has then ownership. That system may work in a lot of areas. It may not as well in Washington because the hazards that we face are no notice hazards, earthquakes, volcanoes, things like that. But that there are use cases out there.
Perfect. Thank you. So then the next question is asking about energy efficiency efforts to decarbonize the church. Eric, could you speak to, I think you mentioned in your presentation that you all are interested in heat pumps, but could you speak to if and what efforts were made before installing or sizing a solar battery storage system, if you all had done any decarb efforts, any energy efficiency efforts beforehand, and then also, preview what's next for the church?
When we started thinking about this and had the call to action, if you will, at our conference level about 50% reduction by 2030, we just decided we need to go after the big stuff. And it was electricity and natural gas. So we've been focusing on that. So in our church, no, we did not do any other efforts. We were just trying to get the big numbers to drop. But the other big number that we've been working on is heat pump, and there's just no money out there to help with heat pumps. And so we're having to use our own resources to make that happen. It's so unfortunate because that's where the big gains are. Stop using natural gas. So, and in terms of resilience, we're not eliminating the natural gas furnace. We're keeping it as auxiliary heat because if the grid goes down, we're going to need to manage our battery electricity availability and not have heat pumps draw that down too fast. So we may change the thermostat so auxiliary heat comes in, and so we use the natural gas in a short outage to get more length out of the battery, especially if it happens in the cloudy winter dark months. What was the second part of the question, Anna?
I think you pretty well covered it.
Okay.
It was decarbonization efforts and energy efficiency.
And
Um,
if I could just, so I will say that this is something that comes up with a lot of the communities that we work with in the technical assistance program. And this is kind of what I meant by thinking big. There's so many different components to energy resilience. And so I have communities, so beyond the Climate Commitment Act, we have pretty strict clean buildings requirements within the state of Washington, where you have to reduce your carbon footprint. Right now, it's for very large buildings. So I actually work with a lot of school districts. And one of the school districts that I work with, all they had to do was install LED lighting to their buildings, and it significantly reduced their energy reliance. Now, this is also a school district that is putting in a solar and storage system. So the system was sized for their current usage, but now that they have the LED lighting, their batteries will last longer. And so it's going to be a multi-layered project or effort. And so again, the more you can think big, the more likely, at least within our program, we're able to kind of braid those different grant opportunities together to actually help you reach your ultimate goal.
I forgot we did LED lighting. Our utility paid for the complete conversion. Puget Sound Energy has a program that'll flip your lights. So yeah, I forgot about that.
awesome. So as folks are building solar and battery storage, they're curious, Eric, what kind of backup power the 80 or so kilowatts of battery storage is. Yeah, 81 kilowatt battery storage system is with solar. How much backup power can that provide? How many hours? What kind of electrical loads can it back up? What kind of services are the church going to provide?
Our goal was to be able to operate up to 3 days in January off the batteries with being pretty operational. This is before heat pumps. So the system was designed to accommodate that. And we divided the system up into two separate systems, one for the parsonage and one for the sanctuary. So that was the plan, 2 to 3 days. If it's in the summer months, we're going to be good because we've got a lot of power coming out of the system. And in fact, we also have an electric vehicle charger that we put in the parking lot. And we were told by our installer that, look, if it's July and we go off the grid, you can call all your friends to come charge their electric vehicles because there's no way we're going to be able to use that juice. But no, 3 days, January, cloudy, but it's going to take some management, but that was the design plan.
Great. And is that for full building load, do you know, or are you all focusing on critical loads, understanding that it's not?
No, it was full building load, but we're not that big, and it's ebb and flow with how the building are used. So it would have been bigger had we had a heavier load. Now, and as you know, we've asked for a clean energy fund, a clean energy group, a technical assistance funding, because with the addition of the heat pumps, we want to add more battery for that. And the state has said, okay, how much do you think you need? But we need the technical experts to tell us. So that's what we'd use some technical assistance fund to maybe get some more batteries, so we didn't have to turn to natural gas when the grid goes
Yeah.
up.
Yeah. To make the financial outlook of the system work, to make all the numbers add up, to be able to install Solar+Storage, are you all participating in, an energy efficiency program or demand response program, or what's available from the utility? Are you participating in any utility programs if they're available for battery storage, or for that matter?
Not yet. We're just beginning to look at that, and our utility has been focusing more on residential solutions. So there's some pretty interesting residential solutions, and they may flip that into something more commercial. Maybe Kate knows more.
Yeah, Washington state utilities are, well, one, our utility system is very unique. I think we have 39 different electric utilities in our state that all kind of they have their own ways of doing things. But beyond that, we're kind of a little bit behind on some of these, utility partnership programs, because the idea of solar and storage being a viable option, especially in Western Washington, has just culturally not been there, because everybody's like, oh, the sun is never out, which is not really the case. We just want everybody to think that the sun's never out so that they, so
But
that stay, yeah. But ultimately, solar is a great option. But Eric is right. I mean, you're working towards that darkest day, and in the winter, the sun doesn't come out very often. And so even the idea of utility scale battery systems, for larger efforts, that's all relatively new to Washington state compared to other areas within the US.
because they've always said, well, we have so much hydropower. Why do we have to worry about that? So the
Exactly.
utility I've worked with, it has its first solar field coming online soon. So we'll see if they get some programs out of that. Good question, though.
Great, great. So with just a couple minutes remaining, I think I'll end up on one last question. And it's for community folks who are interested in building their own solar and battery storage projects. First, who should they reach out to if they need support, if they have questions? Specifically in Washington, I can answer nationwide. If you're not in Washington state, you're welcome to reach out to me. You can find my contact information on our website, but I'll hand that over to you both to give a little bit of support there of who folks could reach out to.
There's some really good national level nonprofits. Clean Energy Group is one of them, that have a lot of really good resources, like Solar US or something like that. I wish I had those names at my fingertips. But then also within each state and community, there are often nonprofits that are working on this in particular. For us in Washington, in the state capital, Olympia, there's a group called Olympia Community Solar. And they're dedicated to making these things happen, whether it's residential, community-based, or nonprofit-based. And they have all kinds of resources that are super helpful. So find that energy-focused nonprofit that's relatively localized, but also look for the big national groups. It's out there.
Yeah, within the state of Washington, as long as it's not just an individual household, you can always reach out to me. Part of my job is hearing your needs, hearing what you're trying to accomplish, and then helping find where you should land if I'm not the right spot. Now, I will say that historically, most of the programs that we've had at the Department of Commerce have been for community buildings, local governments, things like that, around solar and storage. But we did receive a very sizable Solar for All award from the federal government, that is actually focused solely on multifamily housing and community solar. So that is going to be a more residential, individually based program. It's not fully fleshed out yet, so TBD on that, but it is coming. And a lot of our utilities, especially some of the all the larger investor-owned utilities, but even some of the publicly owned utilities, they're starting to create their own community solar programs as well. So I usually refer people, check with your utility as well.
I think there's a little, do you call it a hack if it's kind of a workaround these days? I'm a boomer, so I don't have all this language. So I think a good hack is get some bids. Go to some installers, have them come out and say, and they will start asking you all these questions. Now, you want to make sure you end up with a reliable installer, and so ask around word of mouth. Usually people who've had work done in their homes often know if it went well or not, but they will get your language up to speed, and they'll put questions before you that'll help you to go find the answers, especially if your system is not too complicated like ours was. It was just panels, a bunch of batteries, get it done. And we had a great installer, and it's been worked out great.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both so much. We're now at the top of the hour, so we'll close out this webinar and I'll invite Sam to bring up our upcoming webinars. But again, I just want to thank you both, Eric and Kate, so much for joining today and sharing about your project, sharing, more broadly about how other folks can get involved and install Solar+Storage and bring resilience to their communities. It's a really powerful movement. Never more important of a conversation than this year. So moving forward, our next webinar is going to be on June 2nd. It's about long duration energy storage. And then we have a couple more webinars that you all may be interested in. We have fire safety with Captain Burt on June 4th. Also 2 weeks away. And then later in June, we have one focusing on Solar+Storage resilience efforts in North Carolina after Hurricane Helene last year. So lots of powerful testimonies and stories and information, resources, etc., that will be shared in future webinars as well. So again, like I said at the top of the hour, this webinar has been recorded. It will be posted on our website. And everyone who RSVP'd for this webinar will also have a recording sent to their inboxes. So that is forthcoming. Again, thank you everyone for joining today's webinar, and thank you especially to Kate and Eric for joining and sharing all this important information with folks. Thanks all. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.